The city of Zubara rose like a jewel amidst the arid plains of ancient Africa. Its golden palaces glittered under the harsh sunlight, reflecting wealth that seemed almost blinding to the eyes. Markets buzzed with traders shouting prices, carrying baskets of exotic spices, fresh fruits, and hand-woven fabrics. But beyond the dazzling surface, a silent desperation lingered. Children ran barefoot through dusty alleys, their tattered clothes clinging to frail bodies. Old men and women bent under the weight of poverty, their eyes hollow from hunger. Zubara, a city that seemed majestic at first glance, bore the deep scars of injustice and greed. At the center of it all, King Darum sat atop his throne, a man whose lust for wealth knew no bounds. Beside him, Minister Mako whispered schemes and twisted words, ensuring that every coin of labor earned by the people found its way into the palace coffers, leaving the villagers with empty hands and empty stomachs. Into this world of gilded cruelty stepped Kalen, a young farmer's son from a distant village. He had come in search of work, hoping to send some coins back to his family, to keep them fed and alive. The city overwhelmed him at first, the sheer size of it, the bustling streets, the aroma of roasted meats mingling with the stench of neglect. As he wandered through narrow lanes, Kalen observed the stark divide between wealth and poverty. A merchant flaunted a golden necklace, while children scavenged scraps nearby. A carriage pulled by fine horses passed, splashing muddy water over villagers, yet no one dared protest. Each sight tore at Kalen's heart, stirring anger, yet he kept his resolve. He had come here for honest work, not to fight the system. But the city had a way of revealing truths that could not be ignored, and soon Kalen would find himself drawn into a web of corruption far darker than he had imagined. It did not take long for Kalen to learn the name Mako. The whispers of fear and anger among the villagers were unmistakable. "It was Mako who brought misfortune upon us," an old woman muttered as Kalen helped her gather scattered vegetables in the market. "He has the king in his pocket. Do not cross him, or you will vanish like others." The word struck Kalen with an unexpected chill. He had heard rumors about his father's death, a tragedy shrouded in lies and accusations, but the details had always been murky. Now, standing in the heart of Zubara, the pieces began to align. Mako was no ordinary minister. He was a puppeteer, weaving schemes so intricate that even the king remained blind. A fire kindled within Kalen, a mix of grief and simmering vengeance. He clenched his fists as he walked past the towering palace walls, each step bringing him closer to the truth he had long sought. But for now, patience was his ally, for the city was a dangerous place, and one misstep could destroy him before he even began. Night fell over Zubara like a heavy velvet curtain, and the city's glittering lights offered little comfort to those trapped in poverty. Kalen found a small corner near the edge of the marketplace to rest, the sounds of distant laughter and cries blending into a haunting symphony. He reflected on the tales of his father, the man who had been wronged by someone he had once called a friend. Images of that fateful day haunted him. The betrayal, the whispers, the accusations that led to his father's death. But as he looked at the sleeping figures of the villagers around him, he felt a shift in his purpose. It was not enough to seek revenge. He needed to understand, to act with wisdom and courage. The path ahead would not be easy, and danger lurked at every corner of this gilded city. Yet Kalen, though weary and small against the enormity of Zubara, resolved silently that he would uncover the truth, face the corrupt, and if fate allowed, bring justice to those who had suffered for far too long. In the shadows of the city of gold and suffering, a quiet determination took root. The first spark of man who would one day be remembered as Kalen the Restorer. As dawn broke over Zubara, the city seemed to hold its breath, unaware of the storm of truths that was about to unfold. Kalen rose from his corner in the marketplace, his eyes scanning the streets with new sharpness. The whispers of villagers had not left his mind, and every shadow seemed to conceal secrets waiting to be unearthed. He wandered cautiously, noticing how even the smallest gestures of the king's subjects were monitored. Merchants bowed excessively, servants scurried with anxious haste, and guards lingered, their eyes darting suspiciously at every passerby. Kalen realized that Zubara was not just a city of wealth. It was a cage of fear meticulously crafted by those who ruled. And at the center of this web stood Mako, the minister whose cunning had shaped the lives of everyone around him. Kalen's first glimpse into Mako's true nature came as he followed a narrow back alley that led behind the palace. He crouched behind a stack of crates, his heart pounding, as he overheard a hushed conversation between Mako and one of the king's trusted generals. "The taxes must be doubled next week," Mako said with calm cruelty, "and the people will pay every coin without question. The king trusts us blindly. It is the perfect arrangement." The general nodded reluctantly, fear written across his face. Kalen's blood ran cold. Here was the man responsible for twisting the king's trust into a weapon against the people. And worse, it was the same man who had orchestrated his father's downfall. Memories of the false accusations that led to his father's death surged back, and Kalen clenched his fists. This was more than injustice. It was a carefully plotted betrayal that had destroyed lives, including his own. Over the next few days, Kalen observed Mako more closely, learning the patterns of his manipulations. He saw how Mako presented himself as loyal to the king, bowing and smiling, while quietly undermining anyone who dared question his authority. A merchant who once spoke against heavy taxation vanished mysteriously. A group of workers protesting wage cuts was publicly shamed and dismissed, though Kalen caught whispers that some had been imprisoned. Each incident confirmed his worst suspicions. Kalen began to understand the depth of the corruption. It was not a series of isolated acts, but a deliberate system designed to control every facet of Zubara. And yet, the king remained blind, distracted by the allure of gold and the praise of sycophants. The contrast between Mako's quiet cruelty and Kalen's simmering desire for justice became sharper with each passing day. One evening, Kalen found himself in the palace gardens, disguised as a laborer carrying water. The gardens were lavish, filled with exotic flowers and fountains that sparkled like jewels, but the beauty could not mask the tension in the air. He overheard Mako again, speaking to a group of nobles, laughing softly as he described the latest scheme against the villagers. His words were precise, cold, and calculating, revealing a mind that thrived on deception and power. Kalen felt the weight of his anger, but also a growing clarity. He could not act recklessly. He needed patience, observation, and strategy. He began to take mental notes, memorizing Mako's routines, the layout of the palace, and the ways in which the king could be influenced. In his mind, a plan slowly took shape, one that could reveal the truth to people, bring justice to his father's memory, and restore honor to Zubara. Yet, amid these dark realizations, Kalen's heart remained anchored by empathy. He saw the exhausted villagers returning from backbreaking work, the children hiding their hunger behind brave smiles, the elderly bowing in the streets to avoid trouble. He understood that the fight ahead was not just personal revenge. It was a battle for the dignity and survival of an entire city. Kalen began taking small steps, quietly assisting those oppressed by Mako's schemes. He helped a merchant recover stolen coins, guided a young girl safely past overbearing guards, and comforted an old man whose home had been seized for unpaid taxes. Each act, though small, strengthened his resolve and earned him subtle trust among the villagers. At night, as he lay beneath the starlit sky, Kalen realized that the coming confrontation would demand every ounce of courage, wisdom, and compassion he possessed. The threads of fate were weaving a path toward a reckoning, one that would challenge the very foundations of Zubara and determine whether justice or greed would prevail. Kalen had scarcely begun to sense the pulse of Zubara when the skies darkened with an unnatural fury. Clouds, heavy and swollen, rolled across the horizon like an angry sea, blotting out the sunlight and casting the city in an eerie gloom. The wind howled through narrow streets, rattling shutters and scattering loose debris, while the distant murmur of the river grew into a menacing roar. Villagers paused mid-task, glancing nervously at the horizon, their faces etched with fear. Kalen, sensing that something far worse than Mako's schemes was about to unfold, ran toward the riverbanks to investigate. There, he saw a terrifying sight. The river had swollen beyond its limits, its waters clawing at the banks, tearing trees from the ground and swallowing small huts whole. Panic erupted like wildfire through Zubara as people realized that their city, built on wealth and arrogance, was now at the mercy of nature's relentless power. The floodwaters surged with ferocity that seemed almost alive, battering the marketplace, sweeping away carts and wares, and dragging villagers into the chaos. Kalen moved quickly, his body propelled by instinct and sheer determination. He waded into the torrents, gripping the hands of those being swept away, pulling them to safety one by one. The cries of children mingled with the screams of adults as roofs collapsed and walls buckled under the water's pressure. Even the gilded palace, a symbol of King Daram's arrogance and Mako's manipulation, groaned and shuddered as waves breached its foundations. Within the storm, Kalen saw Mako desperately trying to escape the rising waters, clinging to a carved balcony railing. But the river had no mercy. Despite his frantic struggles, Mako was torn from the palace ledge, swept away into the roaring current, his cries swallowed by the raging flood. The sight, both horrifying and oddly poetic, reinforced a harsh lesson that greed and cruelty often lead to their own undoing. As the floodwaters spread, Kalen's focus never wavered from those who needed him most. He darted from alley to alley, hoisting children onto his shoulders, helping the elderly navigate slippery stones, and guiding families to higher ground. At one point, a young girl clutched his hand, her eyes wide with terror, as her home was claimed by the surging water. "Do not let go," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos, and she did not. Together, they scrambled onto a collapsed roof, where others had also gathered, trembling but alive. The scenes around him were surreal. The city's golden rooftops glinting dimly through sheets of rain, the marketplace reduced to a turbulent river of debris, and the terrified cries of the helpless echoing against the storm. Yet, through it all, Kalen remained a pillar of calm resolve, a beacon for those who had nowhere else to turn. His courage contrasted sharply with the panic of the privileged and corrupt, showing that true strength lies not in wealth or position, but in heart and action. King Daram, witnessing the devastation from his partially submerged throne room, felt a cold weight settle in his chest. The Golden Palace, once a symbol of invincibility, now trembled under the relentless assault of nature. He saw villagers struggling in the waters, and for the first time, he realized that power meant nothing if the people were left to suffer. Daram's eyes fell on Kalen, carrying a group of terrified children towards safety. There was no gold, no fine clothing, no pomp, only courage, compassion, and relentless determination. The king understood, in a single terrifying moment, that the true measure of a ruler was not wealth, but the willingness to protect and serve one's people. He bowed his head in shame, powerless to stop the flood or undo the suffering caused by his negligence. In contrast, Kalen's actions illuminated a path of hope amid despair, showing the villagers and the king alike that even in catastrophe, humanity's strength can prevail. By nightfall, the river's fury began to wane, leaving Zubara a city soaked, battered, and broken. Debris littered the streets, homes had been reduced to splintered wood, and the marketplace lay in ruin. Yet amid this devastation, a quiet awe spread among the survivors as they recounted Kalen's heroism. The boy who had arrived only days ago now seemed larger than life. His calm in the storm, his courage in the face of impossible odds, had saved countless lives. The villagers gathered on higher ground, shivering and exhausted, but alive. They whispered to one another about the young man who moved like a force of nature, lifting them from despair with every action. And somewhere in the remains of the palace, Daram sat alone, his heart heavy with loss and newfound respect for the young hero before him. For Kalen, the flood was not merely a disaster. It was a turning point. The city, the king, and even Mako had been forced to confront the consequences of their actions. And in that moment of destruction and fear, a seed of hope was planted, one that would grow to restore not just the city, but the spirit of its people. When the first light of dawn filtered through the storm clouds, Zubara lay in a fragile stillness. The floodwaters had receded, leaving behind a city scarred but not defeated. Streets were littered with debris. Collapsed roofs gleamed wetly under the soft sunlight, and the marketplace was a chaotic mosaic of splintered wood and scattered produce. Villagers emerged cautiously from their hiding places, their faces pale with exhaustion but alive. Kalen moved among them, checking on each family, offering hands of support, words of comfort, and guiding them to safer ground. His presence was steady, unwavering, and filled with a calm authority that inspired trust. Those who had watched him face the river's fury could not help but see him as more than just a boy. He had become a symbol of resilience, courage, and hope in the heart of Zubara. Meanwhile, King Darum wandered through the ruined palace grounds, his mind heavy with shame and regret. He watched servants hauling wet furniture, guards assisting frightened villagers, and citizens salvaging whatever they could from the wreckage. For the first time, the king truly saw the city through the eyes of those who had suffered under his rule. He remembered the lavish feasts he had held, the gold he had hoarded, and the orders he had given with blind trust in Mako's counsel. And now, all of it lay in ruin. A bitter understanding settled in his chest. True power was not measured by riches or dominance, but by the strength, care, and courage one showed toward the people. He thought of Kalen, the boy who had arrived only recently, yet had accomplished more in a single night than the king had in years. Darum's heart ached with the realization that he had been blind, and in that vulnerability, he felt the first stirrings of humility. Kalen, unaware of the king's internal reckoning, continued his work among the villagers. He helped rebuild collapsed shelters, guided families toward supplies, and encouraged neighbors to come together to salvage what they could. The acts were small individually, but immense collectively. A demonstration of leadership not imposed by title, but earned through action and compassion. Villagers whispered among themselves, marveling at the boy's courage and selflessness. "This is the one we should follow," an elder said softly. "Not the king who hides in gold while we suffer." The word spread like wildfire, and soon, even those who had once feared the boy now sought guidance from him. In the midst of devastation, a new leader had emerged, not from birthright or privilege, but from moral strength and a fearless heart. Kalen's eyes, scanning the recovering city, glimmered with determination. He knew this was only the beginning of restoring Zubara, and that the lessons of the flood must shape the city's future. Eventually, the paths of king and boy converged. Darum approached Kalen cautiously, feeling a mixture of reverence, guilt, and awe. The villagers fell silent, sensing the gravity of the moment. I was wrong," Darum admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "I trusted the wrong man. I ignored my people's suffering. I cannot undo what has been done, but I want to make it right." Kalen looked at him steadily, his expression calm yet firm. He could see genuine remorse in the king's eyes, but he also knew that words alone were meaningless without action. "It is not enough to say sorry," Kalen replied. "You must prove it, not to me, but to those whose lives you affected. Leadership is not wealth. It is responsibility. Protecting, guiding, and standing with your people, that is the measure of a ruler." Darum nodded, swallowing his pride, fully aware that the boy before him possessed wisdom far beyond his years. In that moment, a bond of trust, respect, and shared purpose began to form, a bridge between the old order and a new era for Zubara. In the days that followed, the city slowly stirred to life, led by Kalen's guidance and Darum's newfound humility. Villagers worked side by side, rebuilding homes, clearing debris, and restoring the marketplace, all under the watchful eyes of the boy who had proven that courage and compassion mattered more than gold. Darum took active steps to right the wrongs, using his influence to repair injustices and protect those who had suffered. He learned from Kalen's example, listening carefully and acting decisively when help was needed. Together, the two of them transformed Zubara from a city broken by greed into one rekindled by unity, empathy, and justice. The villagers began to speak of Kalen with reverence, calling him Kalen the Rescuer, a boy whose courage had not only saved lives, but had also restored faith in the very heart of their city. In the shadow of disaster, a new dawn had arrived, one illuminated not by gold or power, but by the unwavering strength of character, compassion, and moral courage. With the floodwaters finally receding, Zubara faced the daunting task of rebuilding not just its streets and buildings, but its very spirit. The city that had once gleamed with gold now gleamed with determination, as villagers rolled up their sleeves and worked side by side. Kalen moved among them, organizing efforts, offering guidance, and ensuring that everyone had a role to play. No act of restoration was too small. A roof patched, a cart cleared of debris, a child comforted. His presence inspired hope and courage, reminding everyone that even in the wake of disaster, unity and determination could overcome despair. The marketplace, once a symbol of greed and corruption, was slowly transformed into a place of fair trade, where villagers could sell their goods without fear of exploitation. King Darum, humbled and determined to make amends, threw himself into the reconstruction efforts. No longer content to sit atop the palace, he worked alongside his subjects, carrying supplies, offering aid, and listening to the concerns of the villagers. Each act of service was a step toward earning back the trust he had lost, and he observed Kalen with a mixture of respect and awe. It became clear to him that leadership was not about commands, gold, or titles, but about responsibility, compassion, and courage in the face of adversity. The king learned from Kalen, absorbing lessons of humility, fairness, and the power of action over words. Together, the young boy and the humbled king became symbols of a new Zubara, one built on principles of justice and empathy. The rebuilding was not without its challenges. Some villagers had lost everything, and mistrust lingered in the air, fueled by years of oppression. Yet Kalen and Darum faced each obstacle with patience and wisdom. Kalen encouraged the villagers to support one another, teaching them that survival and growth were collective efforts. Slowly, homes were rebuilt stronger than before, shops reopened, and the streets once again echoed with the laughter and chatter of the people. Villagers began to understand that the city's recovery depended not solely on rulers or heroes, but on the courage, unity, and resilience of everyone who called Zubara home. Mako, who had been swept away by the flood, became a cautionary tale whispered among the villagers. His greed, cruelty, and betrayal were remembered not with fear, but as a reminder of the cost of selfishness and the strength of moral courage. Kalen, however, did not dwell on revenge. Instead, he focused on teaching lessons of justice, integrity, and compassion. Children gathered to hear stories of the flood, of bravery, and of the difference one person could make. Through these narratives, Kalen's actions became a guiding principle for future generations, a moral compass for a city determined never to repeat the mistakes of the past. As the months passed, Zubara transformed into a vibrant, thriving city. Gardens bloomed where rubble once lay. Schools opened where children had previously toiled in fear, and a spirit of fairness permeated the marketplaces. Kalen, still young but wiser beyond his years, guided the people with humility, never seeking praise for his deeds. King Darum remained by his side, learning, supporting, and ensuring that the principles of justice, equality, and service were upheld in every corner of the kingdom. The partnership between the boy and the king became a living example that leadership and courage are not bound by age or wealth, but by integrity and heart. The villagers, who had once lived in fear and submission, now celebrated a newfound freedom and pride. They began to call Kalen the Restorer, honoring him not just for saving their lives during the flood, but for restoring the spirit of their city. Murals were painted depicting his deeds, songs were sung in the evenings recounting his bravery, and stories of his wisdom and compassion spread far beyond Zubara's borders. He had become more than a hero. He had become a legend, a symbol of hope, justice, and unwavering moral courage. In the quiet moments, Kalen reflected on his journey, from a poor farmer's son seeking work to the savior and moral compass of a kingdom. He understood that the flood had been a catalyst, revealing not only the corruption and greed that plagued Zubara, but also the strength, resilience, and unity of its people. He knew that the true restoration of Zubara would continue not through his deeds alone, but through the courage and integrity that he had inspired in every citizen. As the sun rose over a fully restored city, bathing the golden rooftops in a warm glow, Kalen stood at the highest point of the marketplace, looking out at the bustling streets and smiling faces. The city had survived disaster, learned its lessons, and emerged stronger, and at its heart was a boy who had chosen justice, compassion, and courage over revenge. In that moment, Zubara was not merely a city restored. It was a city reborn, its legacy forever intertwined with the name of Kalen the Restorer.